Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we are sinking our teeth, and yes, pun fully intended, into a really tricky corner of fantasy and horror.
Oh yeah. Shapeshifters.
Specifically werewolves, but it feels like, stepping into a minefield with the terminology. The rules seem so blurred sometimes.
They absolutely do.
If you're into folklore or fantasy books or even just modern action horror movies, you've definitely heard Lycaon, werewolf, and lycanthropy used almost, interchangeably.
All the time, like they're synonyms.
Exactly. But looking through the sources you pulled together, it seems like these are actually three very distinct ideas. And if you mix them up, you kind of miss the whole story.
You really do. It changes everything.
So our mission today is simple. Let's build that expert lexicon for you. We want to clearly define these three terms. We're talking the condition, the classic creature, and then this sort of enhanced subtype.
Right.
The goal is so you can navigate all this stuff, ancient myths, gothic horror, modern movies, with real confidence.
And what's fascinating here, I think, is that this isn't just about words. It's really about understanding power and control. We're separating the condition itself from the being experiencing it.
Okay.
And then we're distinguishing between really two very different types of beings, defined largely by how much control they have.
Control. That sounds key.
It is.
Yeah.
These distinctions explain why one version is often tragic, bound by fate, while the other might be more like a calculated weapon. That difference in agency, that's where all the good story tension comes from.
Okay, let's start right at the top then. The broadest term, the one that seems to cover everything else that follows, lycanthropy. Let's unpack that one. What exactly is lycanthropy?
Right. So lycanthropy is the big umbrella term. It defines the phenomenon, the condition, or sometimes the curse of shapeshift.
Big act of changing.
Exactly. It refers specifically to the transformational power itself. The ability, whether it's magical or biological, depending on the story, to turn into a wolf or some kind of wolf-human hybrid.
So it's the state, the affliction.
Precisely. But it's not necessarily tied directly to the person experiencing it in terms of their identity during the change. It's the capability.
Right.
And it's interesting, in older texts, especially like medical or historical ones, it was sometimes used differently.
How so?
Well, it's sometimes described a mental illness, a delusion where the person genuinely believed they were a wolf, even if there was no actual physical transformation happening.
Huh. So, clinical lycanthropy versus mythological lycanthropy.
Sort of, yeah. But for our purposes in folklore and fiction, it's primarily about the actual shape-shifting ability.
Okay, so lycanthropy is the ability, the power, the condition itself. Got it. Not the person, not the creature yet.
Exactly right. And once we've established that base concept, that ability, then we can talk about the classic creature known for undergoing it.
The werewolf. The
werewolf. This is the one we see in, classic stories, deep folklore, prowling through the woods and old European tales.
That's the one.
So what are the absolute core traits based on the sources that define this specific creature, the werewolf? Okay, the werewolf is the individual human who has lycanthropy. But the crucial defining trait, the thing that really sets them apart from a lot of modern takes, is that the transformation is almost always involuntary.
Involuntary. So it just happens to them. They don't choose it.
Exactly. It's often framed as a curse, something inflicted upon them, happens to them, not by them.
And it's triggered, by something external.
Yes. Usually specific conditions. The most famous one, obviously, is the lunar cycle.
The full moon. Can't escape that one.
Nope. It's almost synonymous with werewolves in popular culture. That connection, that sort of mechanical link to the moon, appears across centuries of stories.
Okay, so involuntary transformation, triggered by the moon. What about the form they take?
Typically, the classic werewolf transforms fully into a wolf, like a large, perhaps unnaturally large wolf, or sometimes into a really monstrous, four-legged beast form that's barely recognizable as having been human.
And crucially, what happens to their mind, their humanity?
That's the other key part. They generally lose it. They lose their human consciousness, their rationale. They become driven entirely by bestial urges, by instinct.
Total loss of control.
Total loss. The narrative core is almost always about that loss of self, loss of soul, loss of control over one's actions. It's tragic.
That makes sense. That total involuntary loss of control really anchors the werewolf in that realm of tragedy, or sometimes pure horror. They're defined by what they can't stop themselves from doing or becoming.
Precisely. It fits perfectly with the traditional mythology where it's a curse, maybe divine punishment, or the result of some dark magic or bite. The werewolf is fundamentally a victim of its own condition.
Which explains the silver weakness too, right? It's like fighting the curse itself.
Often, yes. Silver being a symbol of purity, it's seen as something that can harm or even cure the supernatural affliction, not just kill the physical beast.
Okay, fantastic. That gives us a really solid base. Lycanthropy is the ability. Werewolf is the classic, involuntary, often tragic creature bound by that ability. All right, now, here's where things get, as you said, really interesting. We move into the more modern evolution, this third term that seems to pop up everywhere now, Lycans.
Yes, Lycans. And the term itself, Lycan, is pretty clearly just a shortening and abbreviation derived from lycanthropy.
Makes sense.
And its use is almost entirely rooted in modern fiction. Think movies, video games, contemporary fantasy series. It functions as a specific subtype of werewolf. Maybe even an evolved or engineered version.
Like Werewolf 2.0.
Something like that, yeah. When storytellers needed a shapeshifter who could be more than just a mindless beast, who could be part of a plot, have motivations, they essentially needed to create the Lycan.
Okay, so what are the key differences the sources point out? What makes a Lycan not just a werewolf? Let's start with that control issue again. How do Lycans handle the transformation?
Control is probably the single biggest differentiator. Unlike the traditional werewolf, the Lycan is almost always defined by retaining their human consciousness, or at least retaining a high degree of intelligence and strategic thinking, even when transformed.
Ah, so they know who they are, what they're doing?
Generally, yes. Maybe not always perfectly calm, but aware. This lets them function as characters with agency, soldiers, leaders, antagonists with plans, not just monsters.
Which must impact their physical form too, right? If they keep their mind, maybe they don't become a full animal.
Exactly. Their transformed shape is very often described as a more humanoid wolf form. You know, the big bipedal, muscular wolf-man hybrid look.
Standing on two legs, maybe using tools or weapons.
Precisely. That hybrid form visually signals that they aren't just a wild beast. There's something more. An enhanced human, in a way, still recognizable beneath the fur and claws.
Okay, not just a giant wolf running wild, but something more tactical. And the final, maybe biggest distinction, how do they trigger the change? Are they still howling at the moon?
Usually no. This is the other massive difference. Lycans typically can shift forms at will.
At will, so no full moon required.
Nope. They are often depicted as masters of their condition, not slaves to it. This voluntary transformation completely frees them from the narrative limitations of the classic werewolf. It makes them perfect for action stories, for plots involving strategy and choice.
And we have to mention the specific context where this really got cemented for a lot of people. The sources specifically call out things like the Underworld film series.
Absolutely. That series is a prime example. It built a huge part of its mythology around the conflict between the aristocratic vampires and the, well, more evolved controlled Lycans, contrasting them with the more feral, less controlled werewolves from their past.
Right, that distinction became a core plot point.
It did. It really helped codify those new rules in pop culture. If you want a creature that can lead an army, follow orders, make complex plans, the classic werewolf just doesn't fit the bill. The Lycan was, in many ways, invented out of narrative need.
Okay, let's pull this all together then. A quick summary for everyone listening. Lock in this triad.
Right. First, lycanthropy. That's the condition itself, the phenomenon, the ability or power to transform. Think of it like the software, maybe.
Okay, the software.
Yeah.
Then the werewolf, that's the classic creature running that software. Defined by involuntary transformation, loss of control, often tied to external triggers like the full moon, the tragic figure.
Perfect. And finally, the Lycan. That's the modern, often enhanced subtype. Key features are voluntary control over shifting, retaining human intelligence and consciousness, and typically having that hybrid humanoid wolf form. The strategist, the warrior.
Got it. Condition, classic creature, controlled subtype. So connecting this back to the bigger picture, why is holding on to these distinctions actually important for understanding stories? Why not just lump them all together?
Because the specific word used really signals the rules of that fictional world and the role of the creature. If a story talks about someone suffering from lycanthropy, the focus might be on the curse, the search for a cure, the internal struggle. If the creature is explicitly called a werewolf, especially in a traditional sense, you expect horror, tragedy, uncontrollable rampages, maybe a focus on fate and lack of agency.
Makes sense.
But they were called Lycans. Suddenly the story opens up. It could be sci-fi, action, political intrigue between factions. It implies strategy, maybe warfare, questions about the ethics of using such power voluntarily. The term sets expectations.
So using the right term avoids confusion and immediately tells the audience what kind of story, what kind of rules they're dealing with.
Exactly. It's a shorthand for the entire narrative framework surrounding the creature.
So what this really means for you listening is that you now have this framework. You can see why these creatures look and act so differently across different books, movies, games.
Yeah.
If a writer wants a tragic victim of destiny, they'll likely lean into the constraints of the classic werewolf. If they need intelligent, controllable, shape-shifting warriors or anti-heroes, they'll probably use the term Lycan or define their werewolves with Lycan-like traits.
The language really does shape the character's fate, and often the genre of the story itself.
It's fundamental to building that lore.
Absolutely. Having clear definitions is just foundational for any kind of complex world building or mythology. And understanding this particular split between involuntary fate and voluntary power really lets you critically engage with how different stories choose to use these powerful archetypes.
That's brilliant. Thanks for laying that out so clearly. It really helps untangle a lot of confusion.
Happy to. It's a fascinating evolution in mythology.
It really is. Okay, so we've established this core difference hinges on control, on agency. The werewolf, bound by the moon, by fate. The Lycan, transforming by choice, by will.
Which leads us to a final thought for you to chew on. How does this shift we see in a lot of modern stories, moving away from the creature totally enslaved by curses and destiny, towards one that transforms consciously, strategically, how might that reflect our own, maybe modern anxieties or ideas about human agency versus fate?
Are we perhaps just more comfortable now with monsters that we, or at least our heroes, feel they have some measure of control over? Is the uncontrollable beast too terrifying? Or maybe just less narratively flexible for the kinds of stories we want to tell today?
That's a really interesting question. Definitely something to think about. What does our preference for controllable monsters say about us?
Something to mull over until next time.
Indeed.
We'll see you on the next deep dive.
Welcome back to the deep dive. You know, for centuries, that image, a human changing violently into a wolf under the moon, it's really stuck in our heads, hasn't it?
It certainly has. A powerful archetype.
So today we've got this stack of sources all about werewolves, the ultimate monster of transformation, maybe. And we want to hunt down the specifics, you know, the history, the folklore details that explain why this creature still grabs us.
Right. What makes it tick, essentially.
Exactly. Our mission isn't just like a summary. We want to pull out those weird, specific bits of knowledge. How does it happen? What are the secret signs, the warrior connections, the things that make it more than just a scary story?
We're trying to figure out why the human turning wolf thing has fascinated people for thousands of years.
Okay. So, starting point, what's the core definition we see across these sources? Is it consistent?
It is. Remarkably so, actually, right from the beginning. Basically, a werewolf is defined as a human who's forced to shapeshift into a wolf, or sometimes a wolf-human hybrid.
Right, the transformation.
And it's often involuntary, usually tied to the full moon. They prey on people, animals, sometimes even corpses, quite grim. And then by day, they change back to human.
And this isn't just like a medieval Gothic invention.
Oh, no, not at all. This idea, the man-wolf, we can trace it way back. We're talking ancient Greece, ancient Rome, and, you know, all across Europe, really.
Wow.
It immediately taps into that deep human conflict, doesn't it? That fear, but also that fascination with the wild, with the supernatural, the uncontrollable.
Okay, let's unpack that ancient foundation a bit more.
Yeah.
Before we got the standard werewolf we see in movies, what were they calling this? Was it always seen as like a magic? Or something else?
Well, the names themselves tell a really interesting story. In ancient Greece, for example, the stories were often tangled up with myths, with religion, people being punished by the gods, turned into wolves, that kind of thing.
Okay.
But it's the Romans who gave us this really specific, almost clinical-sounding term for the change itself.
Versipellis.
Versipellis, that sounds, yeah, almost like a condition, less like a curse. Exactly. It literally translates to turn skin.
Turn skin.
Yeah. That one Latin word suggests something deep, something almost physical or biological changing. The idea that your skin, the very thing that marks you as human, literally turns inside out or turns over to show the wolf underneath.
Huh. That's powerful.
It is. And that concept, the shifting exterior, the turn skin, it carries through. You even see echoes of it much later in the French term loup-garou,
So that focus on the skin turning, it really sets the stage. It suggests the beast isn't just imposed, but maybe it's already there, just hidden.
That's a great way to put it. Dormant, perhaps.
Okay, so if we accept this idea of a shifting nature, this Vusapellis, how did people think you actually got into this state? Was it always a god's curse? Or were there, more down-to-earth ways described in the folklore?
The causes. Yes, the folklore lays out a whole range of possibilities. It goes from pure supernatural fate right down to very specific, deliberate actions people might take.
Right.
The sources basically point to three main paths to becoming a werewolf.
Okay, what's the first?
The first is probably the one most people think of now. Magical means. Being hit with a powerful spell or getting cursed, or especially in later Christian folklore, making some kind of pact with the devil to get power.
The deal with the devil route. Got it.
Then the second way is contagion. This is the one that's really popular today, right? Getting bitten or scratched by another werewolf.
Yeah, passes on like a disease.
Exactly. Which makes the creature seem terrifyingly close, doesn't it? It's not just out there in the woods. It's something you could catch.
Definitely. Okay, and the third way, you mentioned sources talking about specific rituals, things that sound almost bizarre now.
Yes, and this is where you find some really fascinating specific details, because these rituals suggest that maybe sometimes people actually wanted this transformation, or perhaps more likely they just stumbled into it through local superstitions.
How so?
Well, the sources mention things like deliberately putting on a specific wolf pelt, a kind of ritualistic garment.
Okay, that makes a certain kind of sense. Shamanistic, almost.
Right, but then there are stranger ones, like drinking water. Water that had collected inside a wolf's actual paw print in the mud.
Wait, really? Drinking water from a paw print?
Yes, directly from the imprint left by a wolf.
Wow. That tells you so much about the closeness and fear of the wild in those communities. It's such a basic, almost accidental way to get infected. Blurs the line between a curse and just contamination.
It really does. Or another one was eating flesh that had been deliberately mixed with wolf meat. So these rituals, they imply that taking in the essence of the wolf through its skin, its track, its flesh, was enough to trigger the change.
And like you said earlier, the classic scenario usually involved that involuntary shift under the full moon, often wiping out any human memory of what they did as a wolf.
Precisely. The loss of control, the loss of self, that's central.
So we have the ways it happens. But for the people living with this fear, how could they spot a werewolf, a Vusapellis, when it was walking around looking human? Were there subtle clues? Little giveaways?
Ah, yes, the telltale signs. This is a really key bit of lore, because while the wolf form is obvious, fur, fangs, the whole deal.
Right. Hard to miss.
Folklore came up with these specific small human markers, almost like hidden clues that revealed their double nature.
Okay, like what? What kind of details?
Well, the sources point to things you really wouldn't expect. Very mundane, subtle human traits, like having a unibrow.
A unibrow? Seriously?
Seriously, a unibrow. Or having noticeably curved fingernails. Sometimes unusual patches of hair, particularly hair growing on the palms of the hands.
Hair on the palms and a unibrow. It's almost comical, isn't it? Using it in everyday detail to signal something monstrous.
But think about it. That tiny detail suddenly gives people a reason to suspect their neighbor. It grounds this huge supernatural terror right in the middle of the village in everyday life.
Yeah, that makes sense. It makes the monster relatable in a terrifying way.
That's the real power of folklore, isn't it? It brings the monster home. Now, maybe we can shift gears slightly, because the werewolf wasn't always just this figure of terror or a cursed victim.
Right. You mentioned earlier this idea of fascination, not just fear. So moving from the mechanics of the curse to the cultural meaning. It seems like the creature sometimes represented what raw power, something warriors wanted.
Exactly. What's really interesting here is how that wolf spirit could be deliberately channeled or invoked. There's a clear split. The involuntary werewolf is a curse, a tragedy, but voluntarily taking on the wolf's skin or the wolf spirit, that becomes a symbol of power, of controlled ferocity.
Okay, and we see evidence of this.
Oh, absolutely. It shows up in ancient art and mythology. For instance, the sources mention figures on Greek vases who are dressed in wolf skins. Specifically, there's a figure named Dolan, a Trojan spy.
Golan.
He wore a wolf pelt, not because he was cursed, but to tap into the animal's cunning, its stealth, its predatory nature for his mission.
So adopting the wolf is a tool almost, and this wasn't just a Greek thing.
No, it seems to cross cultures, suggesting it's a really old idea harnessing the predator's spirit. If you look at Scandinavian traditions, for example, we find these amazing bronze engravings from the Vendel era. This is way before the typical medieval werewolf story.
Vendel era, so pre-Viking age, roughly.
That's right. And these engravings show warriors clad in wolf pelts. They're often linked to groups known as the Úlfhéðnar, the wolf hides, or wolf warriors.
Úlfhéðnar.
And the purpose seems to have been ritualistic. By wearing the skin, or maybe through other rituals, they believed they could invoke the wolf's raw, uncontrollable strength and fury in battle.
Making them terrifying opponents, I imagine.
Absolutely. So in that context, the wolf transformation, or at least the wolf spirit, is embraced. It's about becoming a symbol of primal power, making them fearsome warriors, not just a monster lurking in the night. It's a kind of controlled spiritual transformation, totally different from the involuntary turn skin curse.
Okay, so we've got the ancient turn skin, the versipellis. We have those weirdly specific human signs like the unibrow, and then these warrior traditions embracing the wolf's power, which brings us closer to the present day. Our sources show this shift, right? A move towards trying to rationalize the magic somehow.
Yeah, that's a definite trend. Modern stories, films, novels, they often try to find a more, scientific explanation, or at least a psychological one.
How so?
They often frame the werewolf as more of a tragic figure, someone battling an uncontrollable biological urge, rather than just a victim of a spell. The conflict becomes less about fate and free will and more about, say, genetics versus self-control.
Right, the inner struggle. And the source material actually gives us a perfect recent example of that modernization, doesn't it? We still have the moon, but the cause is updated.
Exactly. Look at that 2024 film, Werewolves. It takes the old myth and gives it a completely modern twist. In the film, it's a supermoon that triggers a latent gene in people, causing them to transform overnight.
A latent gene. So it's genetic potential activated by an astronomical event.
Pretty much. The result is the same brutal, involuntary transformation, but the explanation shifts dramatically. We go from magic, curses, and drinking water out of paw prints to genetics and lunar effects.
It shows that the need to explain why this happens, why this terrifying change occurs, it just never disappears. The ancients used magic and ritual. We reach for latent genes and supermoons.
But the core fascination with that primal, uncontrollable change, that seems just as strong today as it was 2,000 years ago.
Absolutely.
And that's what makes digging into werewolf lore so compelling, I think. We've tracked this idea from the ancient Roman versipellis, that very specific turn skin idea, through the warrior clans channeling the beast, right up to this modern, often tragic figure wrestling with a genetic switch.
And along the way, we picked up some genuinely unforgettable specific details. That ritual importance of drinking water from a wolf's paw print, I won't forget that one.
Me neither.
Or the subtle human tell of a unibrow. And the whole history of wolf pelt warriors deliberately harnessing the creature's ferocity.
And ultimately, whether it's triggered by a curse, a ritual, or a latent gene, the transformation in most lore is almost always involuntary, isn't it?
Yeah.
The werewolves, in their human moments, are often stuck with this horrifying knowledge of the beast lurking just beneath the surface, waiting for the trigger.
So maybe the final thought we leave you with, pulling all this lore together, is this. If the change is involuntary, if the beast is always potentially there, just waiting, is the real horror the monster you become under the moon? Or is the deeper horror realizing that maybe that beast was inside you all along, just needing the right conditions, a curse, a paw print, maybe even a gene to finally break free? Okay, so we've all seen it, right? That definitive moment, the huge silver full moon just hanging there in the night sky, and instantly what's about to happen to the poor soul down below. It's like the visual cue for the agony, the transformation, the whole terrifying werewolf thing. And this specific link, the werewolf only changing under the full moon, it feels ancient. Like it's this fundamental rule from, I don't know, medieval times or something. But is it really?
Yeah.
And that's what we're digging into today. This is our deep dive into the sources to figure out if this classic horror movie connection, full moon equals werewolf, is actually rooted in old history or science or maybe something else entirely, something more recent.
It's a great question. And yeah, the sources really push us towards looking at folklore, history, and honestly, movies. Our mission here is to nail down the specific origin of that one idea, the full moon as the trigger. If you, assume this goes way back, well, you might be in for a surprise. It's newer than you think.
Okay, I'm already surprised.
Yeah.
Genuinely. Because, my whole picture of werewolves is built on that moon thing being, ancient lore. So let's unpack it. If we look at the really old stories, the folklore before movies, how did someone become a werewolf back then?
Well, what's fascinating, truly, when you look at the old lycanthropy tales is just how many ways there were. And the moon, it's just not there. Historically, the transformation wasn't seen as this, regular thing tied to the sky. It was much more personal, intentional sometimes. So you usually had two main ways. First, maybe the person could change at will. They learned some magic, maybe used like a special belt or an ointment. They were in control. Or second, it was a curse. Some witch or a powerful figure had doomed them, often permanently.
So it was either choice or being cursed. Control or no control.
Yeah.
The trigger was internal or magical or maybe divine punishment. You're saying the moon literally had nothing to do with it in the original folklore.
Exactly. Nothing. If you go back to the Greek myths or even medieval French or German stories about werewolves, the moon is just absent from that part of the story. The change was about their state or a spell, not about astronomy. It actually sounds almost, kind of boring compared to the movie version, doesn't it? Less dramatic.
Definitely less visual, which I think might be a big clue, right?
Yeah.
So if the old European werewolf didn't need a moon, when did Hollywood decide it did? When was this manufactured, as you said?
Oh, it was absolutely manufactured. And it happens pretty fast, really, in the 20th century. Interestingly, it wasn't even the first attempt. There was this film in 1935, Werewolf of London. He transformed, but it was because of like a rare flower, some kind of tropical disease thing, not the moon.
Right.
So the rule wasn't quite set yet. But then just 6 years later, bam, the full moon causing the force change. That gets cemented, made famous worldwide by one specific movie. The 1941 classic, The Wolfman, Lon Chaney Jr.
Okay, The Wolfman. That's the moment then. This film didn't just show a werewolf, it actually wrote the rule book we all use now.
It absolutely set the rule. The film specifically used the full moon as that absolute unavoidable trigger for the transformation. And crucially, it gave us that famous little poem, the one that explains it all. Even a man who is pure in heart and says his prayers by night may become a wolf when the wolfbane blooms and the autumn moon is bright. That verse, it sounds ancient, right? But nope, written just for the film.
Okay, that's wild. Written for the film. And here's where it gets really interesting for me.
Yeah.
Why did that stick? Why did everyone just accept this brand new movie rule as ancient fact almost immediately?
Well, practicality maybe for filmmaking. It gives you instant suspense, a visual deadline. You see the moon, the audience knows trouble's coming. It's much better on screen than someone just saying, I feel the curse acting up again. It gives you that ticking clock.
That makes total sense for drama. But still, why did audiences just buy it? Usually if you just invent a rule people notice, this felt right somehow.
Yeah, and that's the key, I think. The film wasn't inventing the idea that the moon affects people completely from scratch. It was tapping into something already there, like really old beliefs. The reason people accepted the full moon werewolf link so easily was because it fit perfectly with centuries, maybe millennia, of superstition about the moon influencing moods, behavior, even madness. The groundwork was already laid.
Right, lunacy. We still use that word.
Yeah.
If someone's acting erratically, we might call them a lunatic. And that word lunacy, it comes straight from luna, Latin for moon.
Yeah.
So that tells you way before 1941, people suspected the moon was messing with us.
Exactly. That suspicion is ancient. We're talking ancient Greece, ancient Rome, thinkers like Hippocrates, Pliny the Elder. They were actually writing about this, speculating on the moon's effects on health and the mind. And it wasn't just, random superstition for them. It was based on observation. They could see the moon's power, right? It pulls the oceans, creates the tides. That's a massive, undeniable effect.
Okay. So the thinking was, if the moon can pull whole oceans around, surely it must affect us too, since we're, mostly water. That must pull on the fluids in our bodies, right?
That was exactly the reasoning. It's actually quite a logical leap, given what they knew. If the moon controls this huge natural rhythm, maybe it controls the rhythms inside us too. The humors, they might have called it, leading to mood shifts, madness, maybe even transformation.
Okay, I see how the dots connect now.
Yeah.
You have this really old, widespread belief about the moon causing lunacy.
Yeah.
And then bam, 1941, the Wolfman comes along and uses that existing superstition to anchor its new werewolf rule. It felt old because part of the idea was old.
Yeah.
Which brings us to the big reality check. We got the cultural story. But what about, actual science, modern science? What does it say about the moon really affecting human behavior?
Yeah, the crucial question, and scientists have looked into this a lot for decades, actually. They've tracked Hospital admissions, crime rates, accidents, calls to crisis lines, you name it, all lined up against the lunar cycle. And they haven't just done small studies. We're talking large meta-analyses, combining data from tons of studies to see if there's any real consistent pattern. And the verdict is, well, it's pretty clear. Modern science finds very little, basically no reliable, statistically significant evidence that the full moon directly influences human behavior in those ways.
So all those stories from ER nurses about crazy full moon nights. But we notice the weird stuff more when it happens on a full moon.
That's pretty much what the data suggests. Confirmation bias, or what psychologists call illusory correlation. You expect weird things on a full moon because of the superstition, so when something weird does happen, you remember it and connect it. Weird things happen on other nights too, but we just don't link them to the moon, so we forget. The pattern isn't really in the data.
Okay, and that old gravity argument, the moon pulling the water in our bodies like the tides, why doesn't that hold up scientifically?
It sounds plausible, but the physics just doesn't work out on that scale. Yes, the moon affects huge open bodies of water like oceans, but the gravitational effect on the water inside a small contained system like a human body is, well, it's tiny. Really tiny. Like, the gravitational changes from just standing up are way bigger inside your body than the moon's effect. It's just not enough force to trigger major biological events, let alone, sprouting fur and fangs. Our biology is driven by complex internal stuff, hormones, brain chemistry, our own body clocks, not these incredibly weak external tidal forces from the moon.
Got it. So that really nails it down, the full moon causing werewolf transformations. It's pure cultural storytelling. Amazing visual for movies plugs right into old superstitions about lunacy, but it's not based on actual ancient folklore before the 20th century, and it's definitely not based on any real biological effect.
Exactly. And the big takeaway here, I think, is just how powerful modern storytelling, especially movies, can be, how it can literally rewrite folklore in our heads. The Wolfman came up with a rule because it worked great on screen, and because it resonated with those old moon madness ideas, it just got absorbed, became fact in the popular imagination, making us all think it was always part of the legend.
Yeah, it really makes you think, doesn't it? Like, what other things that we assume are ancient myths or legends actually aren't? Things we think are from deep history, but maybe, they're less than 100 years old and started on a movie screen. Vampires and garlic, maybe.
Yeah.
Or how we picture aliens. It's kind of fascinating that quiet wave fiction can shape what we think is real history. Something to chew on next time you see a full moon.